but I've thinned it down, so please ask any questions in the flow of the conversation if you could. Do I need to click it, or are you going to click it? You will? Okay, let's go ahead and go forward. So we just completed our Public-Private Partnership Summit, fifth one we've had. This was a vehicle the committee put in place to make certain we're able to communicate with everybody across the state, whether it be private sector telecommunications, public safety shareholders, whoever it is. And this is our fifth one. And next slide, please. I think you'll find this was the biggest ever, best panel discussion, and the best attended, and the best use of everyone's time. We were able to bring in FirstNet, our government liaison with FirstNet was able to come in, as was AT&T, brought three people that represented not only some of the radio engineer aspects, the actual project management for this FEMA region for AT&T, and our state public relations liaison for AT&T was all there. So we had more answers than we probably ever had in any summit. Some of the summits were a little frustrating because we'd be asked very direct questions without a direct answer for many of those questions, but we kept the conversation alive until this date. So let's go ahead, Sean. So the big breaking news for everybody right now on the next slide is that AT&T has been given the Prime Vendor Award, and this was met with a little bit of legal contention because there was another vendor who felt that they had should have been allowed to compete at the very end stage. But at the end of the day, there was one vendor still standing, one prime vendor that was there, and that was AT&T. And this is a partnership, and I'm going to spend some time on the actual partnership itself. So if we can go on to the next one. So there's a lot of processes that happened here within the last 30 days that are very important. The first one was March 17th. The U.S. Court of Federal Claims rejects the RIVADA protest. They were protesting not actually the award. They weren't allowed to proceed into the last qualification round, and they didn't meet the qualifications. But why the qualifications weren't met is probably as important as the fact of the case in general. On March 28th, FirstNet Board unanimously authorized FirstNet CEO to take all necessary actions to ensure the award. On the 30th, FirstNet, the Department of Commerce, signed the actual contract with AT&T. And then April 4th, we had our first joint meeting. Chair Lampe is on the call. We were on the call as they made some of the first initial announcements. And so you're getting some of this information right now. Next slide, please. So here's what the rollout, the general rollout, is going to look like. And this is so hot off the press. They're in the middle of their first 180 days post-award. So they're having meetings every day, all this layout's going on. But here's some of the things we do know. AT&T will springboard FirstNet's Band 14 coverage from their existing commercial network. And as has already been said here today, this is kind of good news, means we aren't going to be having conversations that say we're 5% deployed, we're 10% deployed. We'll come out of the gates with some pretty good metrics. Next slide, please. So day one rollout, AT&T is going to provide nationally 72.6% geographical coverage and 99.9% populous coverage. And these look like really, really good numbers, but I want you to know what that means. If you consider that probably over 80% of the state of Iowa's population is in 5% of the geography, you know what that means. So Iowa, being a thoroughly rural state, means that the geographical coverage is going to be the holy grail for us, not necessarily the populous coverage. And so, but the good news is they got a good leg up on the process, which means they're going to be taking their existing 4G LTE network and they're going to begin augmenting it with the processes involved in FirstNet, such as the QPP, which we've talked about, the quality of service priority and preemption aspects will be available. The quality of service will be available day one when they turn this up in the fall. And by end of this calendar year, they'll have the PP added to it. So the entire AT&T national commercial network will have the QPP added in, which was a requirement of the FirstNet. Now, that'll still be on their commercial bands, but with the QPP, that means all law enforcement, first responders have absolute, what they call ruthless preemption. Ruthless preemption means if law enforcement needs it, it's an actual technological term, didn't just make it up, that they will be ruthless about the prioritization that goes to public safety in any event. And so that's going to be available by the end of the year. Local control, they're making available over 100 deployable portable cows, cellular on wheels, and different type of portable apparatus that AT&T is making available to public safety in the nation. They're a very robust cybersecurity strategy, and they are standing up a dedicated customer care just for FirstNet customers. Next slide, please. So here's what the heat map looks like. A heat map is a term we use to talk about coverage. And generally, you would think that everything orange is good and everything lighter is bad. And you can kind of hold true to that, but it's probably even a little worse than you may read. The 4G LTE is the dark orange, and then there's a couple gradients, and this is their heat map. It's not very intuitive unless you really spend time to look at it closely with hashes and shading and things like this. But there definitely are some areas not covered by AT&T's commercial coverage. But what you really want to take a look at on this map, if you were to parse it, you would want to take the partner 2G out of equation, partner 3G out of the equation, 3G out of the equation. I would even say take partner 4G out of the equation because that's not AT&T's network, and we have no indication that that will carry the QPP or even be upgraded. That's a partner. That's where AT&T resells or buys resold cellular service from another provider. And then you can probably take out the 4G, which is that light network. What you really want to focus on is really on the way on the right, the dark orange that says 4G LTE is provided by AT&T. They are going to be utilizing partners, but there's really no guarantee that AT&T is going to sit there and be able to upgrade the partners' cell service. So when you really parse this out, it's good news. We're not at 5%, 10%, but just those of us in the telecom field would look at a heat map and go, yawn, yawn. We have to actually see what the practical coverage is because partner coverage really won't matter in the overall equation. But it's still good news. There's a lot of orange on the state, dark orange, that they have to begin with. So that is good news. Are there some areas that are dry, difficult, and things like that? Yep, and that's always been the case in Iowa. So now they have to figure out how to solve that equation if we're going border to border. Next slide, please. So the RIVADA court case, we can go on to the next slide. They rejected this process because RIVADA posed too much risk as a carrier. And the reason I need to talk about this is we still have a live round conversation of opt-out. What if the state plan is not good? But one of the reasons they rejected RIVADA was not so much that they couldn't do it technically. It was the issue that the vendor who participates in this has to be able to demonstrate 25 years of commitment, dedication, funding, financial modeling for the next 25 years of this contract. And if a state chooses to opt out, part of the criteria that they're now adding in with the Department of Commerce and the opt-out criteria is, so show us how you're going to sustain this, upgrade this, and keep this thing current over the next 25 years. So even if you could print enough money to do the initial build, you still have to maintain and grow this thing for a 25-year period. And here's where AT&T really shined up, because this is really a $46.5 billion network build. And FirstNet's throwing in $6.5 billion from the spectrum sale into that equation. The other $40 billion into this network is coming from AT&T. And out of that, $22 billion they've committed to go into the network over the next 25 years. $18 billion they've dedicated specifically to the FirstNet broadband network. So I think it's going to be very difficult to find a state come along and say, we'll commit to $18 billion over the next 25 years to do it ourselves. So we think that's going to be quite the challenge. And so overall, that risk is one of the primary factors why the judge actually awarded in favor of FirstNet, because FirstNet was saying RIVADA poses too much risk in the long game. Maybe not that they couldn't do it all right now. So in the opt-out conversations, we have to keep that in mind, because part of that criteria is going to be, are you sustainable over the long game of 25 years of financial stability to upgrade, maintain, and keep that thing running, not just get it, because it's going to be a lot worse than a puppy that you bring home. The upkeep is going to be significant in the billions of dollars. Next slide, please. So here's what the framework's going to look like between FirstNet on the next slide. And this is kind of like the Moneyball slide right here. In the blue circle, or the blue gear, there's four things. FirstNet is providing the project program management. They're providing the spectrum, 20 megahertz of spectrum in the band 14 range. They're providing that because they own that. They're providing customer experience. They're providing public safety expertise and all the relationships into public safety. On the other side, AT&T is going to bring in this $40 billion of investment, and I already broke it down for you, 22 and 18. Is going to be that equation, and they're coming to the table with $180 billion in infrastructure and services. They come with the expertise and they come with all the cybersecurity and application knowledge to make this thing work. Next slide, please. So how have we engaged with our government here, iGov, here in Iowa? Well, March 17th, I was able to update Governor Branstad fully on the process where it's at. We are also in March able to meet with the Lieutenant Governor, and the President of FirstNet, TJ Kennedy, was able to come out and meet with the Lieutenant Governor and update her directly, and she was able to ask many questions on the FirstNet process. So our governor and our new governor-to-be is involved very deeply in the conversation, aware of the risks and the impacts into the private sector and everything like that. So I just want to reiterate, we're coming to the end of legislative session. We do not feel that there is any legislative action that needs to happen by way of legislators with a FirstNet decision. This is going to happen solely at the desk of the governor. We have a fully formed conduit and state plan to the governor's desk. We got every wheel greased and cog lubed, everything we think we can do, that if we're given a good state plan, we want a passageway to the governor's office that gives us a day one acknowledgement. So that day one, when that final state plan comes down to our SPOC and to the governor, that we have a day one acknowledgement, which means the deployment begins that day. We could begin signing up subscribers that day. And the nice thing is that's going to happen calendar this year. Next slide, please. Day one begins the day the governor signs. And that begins the day one for us. So when AT&T says day one, the network will be available to you, that means day one that the governor signs, FirstNet is available in Iowa in the existing coverage. And then it begins its augmentation to roll out the Band 14 and the additional processes. So we are in the 100-day post-award state plan period right now. So they're putting state plans together, and they're anticipating those state plans to drop very, very soon. And they actually gave us some time frames. We expect to have final state plans within 180 days. So we're now in the window of this thing coming to life in Iowa. And if we're at the front end of that, we could have FirstNet coverage before Christmas. Next slide, please. So here's the steps. A SPOC meeting will happen. We have the draft state plan to be released. Then FirstNet presents the state plans. Then we actually have an opportunity to provide some comment. This is valuable to us. We didn't know how well they would listen, but FirstNet has listened well in this entire process from the beginning. So we think that it's going to be a good conversation. We hope that the majority of things are handled at the draft stage, and this plan is healthy for all public safety and healthy for the state of Iowa. Then we'll submit comments if there are any, and FirstNet has actually acknowledged they will review those comments and make appropriate changes, and then they will release the state plan in the fall of 2017. So this is the reality we're in right now. We've got a game going on with this thing. Next one, please. So here's the opt-in, opt-out roadmap, just quickly, just to keep everyone aware. This is our approved plan. And the only thing that is different than this that the board here has not seen is that there is an item in here where we will actually notify private sector. It's the fourth one down, where I will actually convene a meeting with the Iowa private sector leadership, which is the head of the ICA, head of the Iowa Wireless Association. And so I will actually present the draft state plan to the private sector so that they're aware of everything going on. And just for the board's knowledge, I believe we've done a great job over the tenure of this project of keeping the private sector very well informed, keeping them at the table, keeping their conversations live, and making certain that their voice is heard at every level, that we can be an advocate for telecommunications and public safety in general for the state of Iowa. Next one, please. So here's a quick one on the device information. Some of you have seen some of this, but there's been a change. I shared with you at the last meeting that the lab, FirstNet lab, did not anticipate having iOS devices. They anticipated it all to be Android. Well, a little change with AT&T. The reason was FirstNet did not anticipate they would have the leverage to be able to get Apple to do a production run with a Band 14 phone radio equipped device. Because they're used to doing production runs in the tens of millions of phones and things like this, and would not do a small dedicated run. AT&T, however, does have a little bit of buying power, being a global GSM iPhone user. Their models they have the buying power to be able to do this. So here's what the vice president managing the FirstNet deployment for AT&T said to me in a direct question at the SPOC meeting was, all mobile device types that currently operate on the commercial AT&T 4G LTE will work on band 14 spectrum when released. So Apple friends, you're back in the game. If you're on Verizon iPhone, you'll have to move to an iPhone on AT&T spectrum for that. But AT&T has said all devices that work on the existing AT&T network will be able to operate in the future, even when it's band 14 released. Doesn't mean there may not be a SIM change or some sort of process, but at least you know the models of phones will be available in that way. Next slide, please. FirstNet will manage the device interoperability with SIM card management. AT&T plays in the global telecom market this way. This is why you can take an AT&T phone to any country, pull out your SIM card, put in another SIM card for the local telco in that country, and your phone will work. They are globally mobile that way, and so this is how the same strategy is how they're going to manage the FirstNet deployment.
Hey, Rick?
Yes,
so
sir.
That's how it works here. If I want to join FirstNet or the AT&T network, I go in, they give me a phone with a SIM card for band 14.
That will be how it works. Initially, you'll be able to go in and just get an AT&T phone
Right.
and be on the commercial network and have the
Right.
benefit of all the QPP.
Right.
When as they deploy band 14, they will have, they'll either mesh the bandwidths together or deal with it with SIM card management. So you could have a band 14 SIM card that would allow for the
So really,
registration on that network.
day one isn't band 14. Day one is the QPP and the service
Band
like that.
14
So
is their commercial 4G LTE.
moving
and
towards a SIM card to band 14 when
Yes.
after you have the device.
Yes.
Okay.
Then they will be integrating the band 14 into those areas and utilizing that spectrum. This is a really good deal for AT&T to have that additional spectrum also. So they'll integrate that within their fabric. I would even anticipate, because they're allowed to, the band 14 spectrum can be resold commercially. So it could be that for us in public safety, it is a moot issue, that whether or not it's commercial bandwidth or the band 14 adds in and expands that coverage, it could just be that we don't even know the difference. And it's just simply available. And they're still utilizing QPP anyway to make those microsecond decisions on bandwidth and prioritization. So next one. So still have ruggedized smartphones, still have different cellular equipment that goes into vehicles. So they're looking for in-car SONEM and all those traditional ruggedized telecommunication radios will still be in play. Next one, please. And they're still testing all sorts of different devices. And again, there's going to be a testing process for devices and for applications. And AT&T is committed to having very rich applications available to all the users on this network also. Next slide. Each device will still have to go through FCC approval, carrier approval, FirstNet approval before it's an approved device. Next one, please. So here's the official next steps as we close. And the blue box is what Chair Lampe will be operating in. You finalize the state plan review with the team, attend upcoming SPOC conference on April 17th, begin addressing the state plan checklist. FirstNet's going to be dropping a care package off to us that's going to say prepare for the state plan. It'll have this, and this. Here's what you need to do. FirstNet has already been in our house and they've looked at our plan that we've put in place, and that's what they need. They need the plan we already have in place. So the checklist will be a little anecdotal for Iowa. And attend the upcoming SPOC meeting in May or June. FirstNet's has started conducting their kickoff meetings. They have started providing information for the SPOC webinar and the June SPOC meeting. They're going to release a state plan guidance plan, that care package I talked about, and they're working with AT&T to prepare the state plan and populate the portal. And so the last note is there's still going to be an electronic portal that'll have 2 logins. Chair Lampe will manage the security for all logins who has access to this portal. One is for him as the SPOC, one is the other for the governor's office. So draft state plan will come down to the SPOC. He will engage with that from that process into the FirstNet Broadband Committee. We'll provide recommendations back up through you, and then he will post that information back up through the portal. The governor's information comes down on the other side of the portal specifically, and Chair Lampe will work with them to make certain they have the appropriate access to get in and out of that portal. And I believe we're done.